Good morning, Nigeria, and welcome to Daybreak, reaching you live from the nation's capital in Abuja. My name is Ayuba Ilia, and yes, I am super excited, as always, to have you join us on the show this beautiful Tuesday morning. I mean, the holidays are over officially. Today is the resumption day for many people. For some of us, there's no public holiday. I mean, your TV has to be on all the time, and which is why we do this every day, every single day. I mean, especially Mondays to Fridays, we have the Daybreak show, and then on Saturday and Sunday, we have the Daybreak Extra. This show on weekdays starts 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. and on weekends starts at 8 a.m. Well, today show has a lot in store. We'll be taking a look at the life and time of Bashir Tofa, who was the presidential candidate in the 1993 annulled presidential elections, and also taking a look at the carryover. Yes, we have crossed over to the 2022, but yet we have some carryovers from 2021 politically. If you look at some of the issues about the electoral bill, the pending assent of the president that we are all awaiting. So it's a major issue on the show today, and as usual, we're bringing you headlines and taking a look at perspectives on the dailies specifically, and we will be joined by Sunday Michael, Deputy Business Editor, Daily Trust newspaper. For now, let's take a look at news highlights coming from the previous day. We'll begin with the story about police in Niger State have arrested two suspected motorcycle snatchers identified as Aliyu A. and Muhammad Dani in Mina, the state capital. The suspects were arrested by the police attached to the GRA police station Mina during their operation at about 2:30 p.m. on Sunday, when they allegedly attempted to kill one of their victims. Now, the suspects, who boarded one motorcycle popularly known as Okada from Fadugbe area of Mina to Shanu area, reportedly hit the rider, identified as Muhammad Idris Sakewa, on his head with a hammer and took the motorcycle. Now, according to Daily Trust, eyewitnesses said loud screaming by the victim attracted people around the area, who went after the criminals, apprehended and handed them over to Fadugbe Vigilante Corps, who in turn took them to the police, while the victim is rushed to the police clinic Ongwendaji, Mina, for treatment. Now, crude oil price at the international market begins 2022 on a positive note. Now, the commodity price rise by 0.72% to $78.34 per barrel, ahead of the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC meeting, which begins today in Vienna, Austria. Now, different sources said OPEC are likely to stick to their plan to add 400,000 barrels per day of supply in February. Last year, oil price rose around 50%, spurred by the global economic recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic slump and producer restraint despite the continuous spread of the pandemic. Another story there says, and former Cote d'Ivoire striker Didier Drogba has spoken about the disrespect going on concerning the Africa Cup of Nations and called for mutual respect. Now, several European clubs are still holding their African players, with some threatening players should they force their way to join their national teams. Now, Drogba says respect must be mutual. AFCON is as important for Africans like the Euros, and Copa America is for the Europeans and the Americans. Now, there is still too much discrimination, inequalities with regard to our competitions. Our players going to represent your country is often synonymous with sanctions upon return from competition. Now, that's as far as the news highlight is concerned. Let's take a look at the events of the 4th of January in world history, as always. All right, quite interesting historical facts there to remember. You know, in our world history, 2010, you have the Burj Khalifa is opened. Burj Khalifa in Dubai is currently the world's tallest building at 829.8 meters. That's quite tall, you know, and that's where many people desire to go for vacation, I can bet you. And then in 1958, we also have the Sputnik 1 falls to Earth from orbit. Now, the Soviet Union was the first nation to send an artificial Earth satellite into space, and then that tragic thing happened. It falls back to the Earth. Now, we also have the 1847 Samuel Colt sells his first revolver. Now, Captain Samuel Walker of the Texas Rangers placed on an order for 1,000 revolver pistols after having witnessed their devastating effect. Now, that was the first time that that pistol was purchased by Samuel Colt. Now, something is also very significant about today. Today is World Braille Day.
Very interesting. I'm particularly interested, you know, in that. It's a day to, you know, to look back, to celebrate, you know, those who can't actually see, and it's quite interesting how they learn, you know, with these brailles.
It's a game changer, really. If you look at, you know, the history of Braille and how many people have now come to be educated, you know, even though blind, but I mean, it doesn't leave them in the middle of nowhere. With Braille, you can still, you know, be educated. And so that's, for me, is a game changer. Now, several things are very significant about Braille. First, you should know that it started out as a military code called the night writing. So that's how Braille came about. You know, the military in the Western nations are known to be innovators of so many things that today we actually, yes, you know, I mean, if you look at even social media, you know, some way the way it came, if you trace back, you would see that they developed certain softwares to help them communicate. And that was how all of those things were developed, and then they are what they are today, used the world over. So it started off first as a military code called the night reading. And then you should also know that Braille is something that, if you look at the people that use Braille, they are very fast. The blind people. Have you ever imagined if you are to read using the Braille? Do you know what it means to use your fingers to actually touch everything and know that, oh, okay, this is A, and then you now identify that this is the word that is here. Imagine you have the word judiciary.
There's just so much
and then you have to use a Braille to know what it is.
There's so much mystery and beauty at the same time behind, you know, the whole conversation about Braille, and it's really very interesting. And we're super glad that they have this to actually learn with.
True. Well, and I think that it's something interesting to learn, even if you're not blind. I think maybe you could just, if you have some time.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Learn how to use a Braille.
to people who can actually see.
Just maybe you find yourself in a very difficult situation and you have to resort to that. Well, that's that. Let's take a look at the dailies on Daybreak today, shortly after this breather. Please stay with us.
But in a situation where you find that a person look like the same,
not necessarily tribal or regional.
because I have said that.
All right, welcome back. If you are just joining us, this is Daybreak on Trust Television. Now, let's take a look at some of the stories that made headways on our dailies this morning. We'll begin with the Daily Trust newspaper. Tributes are gushing in. The lead story there states Bashir Tofa, 1947 to 2022. Writer, politician, activist laid to rest in Kano. Buhari, governors, ACF, NEF, others pay tribute. That story, you're going to find the details, you know, of the life and times of Bashir Tofa on page 5 of the Daily Trust newspaper. Now, on page 20, you'd see judiciary cases, personalities to look out for this year. Other stories, crisis rocks Kebbi APC as factional leadership emerges. Price of crude oil hits $78.34 ahead of OPEC meeting. And you'd also see on page 4, Wison for a bandit kingpin Turji released 52 captives. PDP, APC, Bika over El-Rufai's achievements. You'd also find controversy trails selection of new Olubadan. Husband hires friend for 10,000 to kill pregnant wife in Ogun. That's quite tragic. I actually thought we've moved past these kind of very, very sad stories. Well, we found the details of that story on page 27 on the Daily Trust newspaper. These are some of the lead stories you could find.
All right, now let's take a look at the Blueprint newspaper this morning. Now, the lead story there talks about 2 months to his demise. Tofa tells youth, we have almost exhausted our sojourn on earth. Well, that's something that I'm sure will be ringing in the minds of many of those youths. You also have other stories there that talks about Nigeria to retrieve over 1,500 stolen artifacts in 2022. That's according to the DG, NCMM, and also you would have developing livestock value chain to save Nigeria 30 billion naira yearly. That's according to the RMRDC. Other stories there below the nameplate. APC convention, why February is sacrosanct. That's PGF boss. At the very bottom of the pictorial, the pictorial shows you the burial of Bashir Tofa, and then below that you'd see lawyer to Makinde, be cautious on choice of next Olubadan, warn on Ibadan chieftaincy customary laws, and that's on page 5 of the Blueprint newspaper. At the bottom, rising inflation frustrating Nigeria's economic recovery. That's World Bank, I beg your pardon. Allow us access Forex from autonomous window. APCON. Jailbreakers, over 3,000 escapees still on the run. That's according to Nigeria Correctional Service. And the next one there says, have no hand in Ilana Omodua's threat over Ekiti or Shumpos. That's according to Iboho. Well, these are the lead stories on the Blueprint newspaper.
Okay, let's take a look at other stories on our dailies this morning. On This Day newspaper, no controversy on who becomes next Olubadan, says Ibadan High Chiefs. The riders declare new king will be chosen based on tradition. Oyo, ex-AG advises Makinde against appointment of new Oba. You'd also see Jonathan Sanwo-Olu Anyim mourn late monarch. Other stories, Buhari Tinubu facilitate with Bolaji Akinyemi at 80. You'd also see Buhari Tofa, true and irreplaceable nationalist, ex-presidential candidate buried in between parents' graves. Atiku, Ganduje, Buni also pouring in their tributes. Federal government commences collection of income tax on bonds, short-term securities from today. Stockbrokers express divergent view over new policy. And on page 5 on This Day newspaper, you'd see oil prices bullish as 2022 market outlook remains positive. These are some of the lead stories on This Day newspaper.
All right, now let's take a look at the Punch newspaper. On the Punch, you'd see the lead story, New Year celebrations. Experts project high infection rate as Nigerians shun protocols at fun spots. Yes, we saw that from the pictures we saw coming from some of the parks, and gardens, and even the beach in Lagos, the Oniro beach yesterday. I saw the crowd there was really crazy and massive. So it's expected if we see a spike in the cases of COVID-19. The writer talks about uncontrolled crowds at beaches, others to feel community transmission, expert warns. Recovery rate drops by 73.2%, and CDC distributes 400,000 COVID-19 testing kits. You'll also see the picture there showing you Lagos train service will begin this year. That's according to Sanwo-Olu. I believe that's coming from his visit to the rail station on a, I guess, supervisory visit. And also you'd see below that, police go after revealers behind attack on Temi in Rivers community. You'd also find APC tackles Shehu Sani over government beat, calls ex-senator idle blogger. Well, you also see Lasma thugs, brutalized driver impounds bus agency, ignores driver's petition. And then at the very bottom, Sanwo-Olu, Wike, others mourn Olubadan, hail monarch for contributions. Men exchange blows, arrested as hired killer fails to eliminate pregnant ex-wife. 8 dead, 17 injured in Ogun. Akwa Ibom crashes. FRC blames speeding and others. Then at the very top there, you'd see also SEC and the CBN, others to lift financial sector with fresh 1.54 trillion naira investment. Customs, immigration, 13 others failed to remit 127 billion naira audit report. Nigeria's debt vulnerable, costly alerts World Bank. Sustained bombings force terrorists to surrender, ACF tells military. And so these are the stories on the front page of the Punch newspaper today.
Okay, on The Guardian this morning, the lead story there, legal hurdle clouds Olubadan succession. The riders, Lekan Balogun not qualified to be Olubadan. Ex-Oyo AG writes, Ladoja absent as Ibadan chiefs hold meeting at Balogun's house. It also see elevation of high chiefs to Obas doesn't alter Ibadan's succession process, says Olubadan in council. And to other stories, labor unions strategize ahead of proposed fuel subsidy removal. And The Guardian MD editor-in-chief loses dad. On page 7 on The Guardian, IPOB bans Nigerian anthem in Southeast schools. Use of cows at ceremonies. That's quite an imposure. You'll find the details of that story on page 7 on The Guardian newspaper. To other stories, tension in Imo as Uzodinma uncovers alleged sponsors of insecurity. Tributes pour in as Tofa dies at 74. These are some of the stories on The Guardian this morning.
All right, finally on the Punch, The Nation rather. On The Nation newspaper, the first story there, name prosecute terror sponsors, that's according to Ndume, telling the federal government. Buhari governors, ACF, others mourn Tofa. That's on page 29. The story about Tofa is literally on all the newspapers today, and we'll be looking at his life and time here as well. Lagos, red-blue rail line project still on course. DBN seeks stakeholders not to raise 100 billion naira bond. And then you see also OPEC worried over threat to release 70 million barrels from reserves. And then the lead story says Olubadan, Ibadan chiefs disagree over succession. And then the riders there, Ladoja's lawyer says Balogun not qualified, kingmakers to follow traditional guidelines. Then ban, Twitter meets conditions, Buhari awaits panel's report. So these are the stories on the front pages of our newspapers this morning. And to get perspectives, we have Sunday Michael, Deputy Business Editor, Daily Trust newspaper. Good morning and welcome to Daybreak.
Good morning and Happy New Year.
You're welcome. Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
All right, well, let's have a look at some of the stories here that we, saw. There's one that I saw on The Guardian that sounds hilarious, actually. about IPOB banning Nigerian anthem in the Southeast schools and the use of cows at ceremonies and all of that.
That's quite absurd.
Let's get your thoughts around this story.
Now that you are mentioning it, that means people like Obi Kubana would have been in jail by with the numbers of cows we saw. I think these are all attempts to continue to delineate themselves from the structure called Nigeria. So if you ban cows, you are basically just saying, okay, we will not patronize things that come from the other part of the world because we know cows are largely reared from the north, all right? But the way the country is structured, you are the ones who have most of the ceremonies that desire this thing. So I wonder what would be the alternative for cows. Maybe a million chicken, maybe.
Or maybe goats.
Goats.
In any case, the goats themselves come from
you begin to then dimension
region.
how many goats in a cow and how many goats you then have to do to get what a cow can do in one fell swoop. And you know the whole thing about slaughtering a cow for ceremony is also a status thing. It's a symbol thing about how people who are rich would like to make their events or distinguish their events from what most of us would naturally do. Well, they've always come up with things like this, but I don't see how this is sustainable because even at Nnamdi Kanu's father's burial, cows were killed.
You know, at some point we had some peace and quiet, and then now suddenly they're issuing, statements.
It became a bit quiet after a number of interventions, both frontally by the military and back channels intervention. We deserve a moment of quiet, really. It became heightened with the elections around that region, and after the elections, we've had a bit of quiet. I hope that some way we sustain whatever we have done in the last couple of months to continue to see that ultimately that we have a united Nigeria, and whatever the grievances of these various units of the country are, somehow we find a way to come to the table and resolve it.
All right. Another interesting story, actually, on our front page is the story about the Olubadan succession. That's already creating some kind of controversy and tension and all of that. The man in question is barely been laid to rest, just yesterday, and already we are seeing this,
back and forth
battle, if you like, you may call it Game of Thrones, rather.
Indeed.
So, is this expected?
Yes, it is. If you have taken your time to follow the story of succession everywhere in this country, and maybe if you like around the world, it has always been like this. The moment somebody is pronounced dead, as far as they are concerned, that chapter is closed. The whole question of whether he's buried, he needs to be mourned, are just a different thing altogether. The scheming, even where the succession is determined by the immediate family, even where, in fact, the successor is practically known, it doesn't completely take away people who attempt to scheme, because for them, it's a lifetime, it's a lifetime opportunity to ascend this throne and even change the dynamics of their family story forever. Not to talk of places like this where the ascension to the throne is not exactly about a family thing. It's about people who had made it into a council, and then it can fall on one of those council members, as against other places where the immediate family of the deceased takes over, or where there are ruling houses where it is predetermined that after this ruling house, it then goes to the next. In fact, even where there are ruling houses, the controversies are still there, because when it comes to a ruling house, unlike before where they said the most senior person ascends, now it becomes what is our best foot forward. Because some people want to remain in the throne for a long time. So sometimes maybe the most senior person, as we had with this, the late Olubadan, is already in his late 80s, and you bring them in, there is only so long he can live. So sometimes they move away from all of those persons and go and get a very young, vibrant young person who they think his time on the throne would last so long as to rub off on every member of the family. So all of these dynamics have a way of putting tension on the people who make the pronouncement. So you get this scheming left, right. We saw it with the Emir of Kano's, the one before this, when Sanusi was to be announced. There were quite a number of very fitting contenders at a time. And everybody had all kinds of puzzle around it until Sanusi, late Emir Sanusi, let me not ignite it, right? I mean, sorry, former Emir Sanusi was chosen. So you get this kind of schemes. In this case, it has been complicated by an existing court case, a court pronouncement, that needs to determine the status of who can ascend to the throne or who is not qualified. And what the former Attorney General is saying is that until a court pronouncement is made or they dispose of that case, then it will be difficult to stick to what used to be the tradition.
But I'm looking at the role that development, politics, democracy, has played in kind of changing the way traditional offices, are held. In the past, you hardly would hear all these litigations, and all of that. That's talking about back then, in centuries ago, maybe decades ago, and they run their kingdoms, effectively, without such things. Highest, maybe you would have frictions, and then there will be battle, and then there will be fights, and all that. But now you have governors, you have political office holders, meddling in the whole affairs and all of that. Is that really good?
Well, it depends. It depends on what you define as good. Society has evolved quite rapidly to the extent where people have become uncomfortable with what used to be. And today, with the benefit of the media, every little controversy is there on the front burner, so it becomes easy to tell. Right. We cannot exactly say that there were no controversy those days, but maybe they are not as blown today. I mean, those days as they are today. And two, you now have people who have become extremely rich and successful outside the throne, whose money, can give them the ability to, they become demigods unto themselves because they have the finances to make things happen. You also have the government, as bequeathed to us by the colonialists, that is not an extraction of the ruling house. That also were contending for authority and power. In the case of Ibadan, you remember the late governor telling people that I have the constituted authority in this time. In other words, there is no other power besides me. And they made it such that what used to be our own traditional system of government became subservient to the democratic system of government. The idea is not exactly wrong. It was just that one came up through a system not many of us know how it came about or can explain why somebody is born and is entitled to be a king, whether or not is better educated than all of us, or, I suppose. And so what the democratic system of government afforded us was the fact that we all can choose who leads us through an open and transparent system, and that any one of us who, with the right, with the prerequisites, can aspire, to become a leader, to vote and to be voted for. It kind of democratized leadership. But the idea was, do we then throw away what we inherited, or how do we carry these institutions alongside what we have now come to accept as a more democratic way of choosing leaders? And so that friction, that looking for that fine balance about preserving what we had always known as a monarchy or as kingship, and then having a democratic work side by side and finding relevance for the two of them is what has brought us to this level. So a governor comes in, if the king is becoming overbearing, he dethrones him, bring in somebody else. So all of those things distorted how these flows has happened. And then within those families, somebody who probably his turn will be in another century now has so much money and can upturn the Council of Chiefs and get them to make decisions that will favor him and set aside several other families who will get. All of those kind of politics in time past have completely altered what used to be a smooth flow, and today we have all this kind of controversy.
All right. Now let's take a look at, other stories. Tributes, are pouring in to someone who many would describe as a true nationalist. Many say he was the voice of the North, Bashir Tofa. Could you just comment on who Bashir Tofa really was?
I wish I had the words to better describe him than the papers have already done. Some describe him as a true statesman, a true gentleman. And that is what he has been. If you cast your mind back to all the time that we have known him, you will rarely associate him with any kind of controversy. You know, the type that we get from some elder statesmen today that seem to tear the country apart, or, you know, divide the country into different units. I am standing for this whole, I'm a statesman, but I am for my people first.
Ethnic jingo.
You know, ethnic jingo is basically, you know, so he isn't one you want to associate with those kind of perception. He has not bred that kind of brand. At any rate, you will recall that he contested for the presidency of this country twice. In fact, somebody wrote a fine line of how death reminds us of our mortality when he said, this is Bashir Tofa's grave, the man who once described himself as the answer. You know, we were young at the time. I remember very well the jingles of 93, they rest in my head, you know, between Abiola and but it was very nice, SDP and PDP at the time. You can practically remember the wordings of those jingles, and they've lived with us all these years. And you know what's interesting about this phenomenon was the fact that he contested for the presidency around 43.
Wow.
You know, so you can imagine why he has been in our memories for so long. You know, and despite, you know, losing out of that under very controversial, the whole annulment of 2020, he has remained a calm individual, only coming to the scene to intervene when there is a crisis and taking the backseat, like when Emir Sonisi was disposed. And of course, you know, he had his own following. The people in Kano were not sure how the followers were going to react to that news and whether it will lead to the breakdown of law and all that. They were the kind of people who used back channels to calm nerves, you know, and enable the government move on. At some point, they said he had a following in Kano that was described as the major opposition party, and he had to dispel all of those kind of rumors with media interviews. They say, I am nobody's enemy. I mean, at this age, I can't even begin to cut enemy for anybody. I am more closer to my grave than wanting to start building enmity. Our interest is for a peaceful and progressive society. So he was that kind of person. I'm sure the various leaders that we have had over time have had to reach him privately to seek for some kind of counsel on how to go about. You would not see him uttering, I mean, even in his comments about this government, he chose his words wisely. He talked about how the advisors of the president are not the best for this country and how they had not really helped him see certain things in the light of which they are, rather than just come out to say, no, you are incompetent, you are lame, you are not, you know. So he was such a fine gentleman, one whom you would want those who have put on the toga of elder statesmen by the virtue of their age to look up to and try to emulate, you know, his persona in a way that doesn't bring hits, but rather unites this country in their addresses.
All right. Now, very interesting. We are also having some other interesting stories. We'll revisit the issue of Tofa, his life and time, later on the program. We'll be having, we're anticipating a guest that will be talking about that, joining us virtually, talking about Engineer Sani Yabagi, who himself was also a chieftain of the same party as late Bashir Tofa. Now, this story about naming, persecuting terror sponsors and Ndume is blowing hot again. We, you know, watched from an interview he granted, talking about how he was accused of being a sponsor of, you know, Boko Haram, and how that dented his image. And now he's also urging, you know, the federal government to, you know, name the sponsors. I mean, it feels like we've been having this conversation forever, and it doesn't look like the naming and the shaming is ever going to happen.
You know, this is one aspect of this fight against terrorists or insurgency that we have completely mismanaged. You know, if you recall, between 2010 and today, 12 years later, what we call name and shame is basically to loop political enemies into that basket of sponsors of terrorists. You know, once you don't like anybody's face, you just simply say they are the ones sponsoring. You know, we played so much with it that it lost the credibility that it needed. I mean, when the current government was in the opposition, they said, no, it's the government that is sponsoring terrors against our people because they want to reduce our numbers. So they made it look like an election thing. They made it, it deserved more seriousness than merely just looping anybody into that name and shame thing. If a government in a state is not comfortable with its own political enemies or people in the opposition party, it names them as the sponsors of terror. We are seeing that not just in the Southeast, even in places like Imo, like in Rivers. If you speak against the government, then you're the one sponsoring terror at home against that government and all of that. So we've used it so cheaply that it has lost relevance. The whole concept of naming terrors are actually far more scientific than they are political. If you say somebody is a sponsor, then you must be able to show how. The onus of proof, the burden of proof, rests with you, the accuser, because for you to come out to make those pronouncements, you would have been able to show, with the help of the security agency, and by the way, they have the capacity if they choose to work, to show how this person has enabled funding.
So is it that we do not have enough evidence to actually name this sponsors?
I mean, are we even looking for the evidence? Are we? We have made a number of arrests. Today, the government is proud to tell you over 10,000 people have surrendered. But is it just enough to come out and surrender? Are they being debriefed? These people lived a life several years in the jungle, and they had a system that supported that lifestyle. How they fed, how they lived, how they got arms, how they kidnapped people, how they took ransom, how they escaped a military invasion, how they got information about our people, how they lay siege on the army. Are we debriefing them? What are the lessons, for the current strategy? What do we learn? Is it possible, you move tens of millions of naira to people in the bush and we can't explain where all that money went? Or that our securities could not put any kind of chips on this funding to track? And
how it is spent.
To track the movement of the fund, or even mark this currency to track how they went? Then you see an ammunition comes in. Every ammunition has a serial number. Have we, after arresting these guys and picking up this ammunition, have we tried to do an audit? Get back to the manufacturers and say, you manufacture ABC and XYZ around so time. Who did you sell to? And then we track to those people. After using this for a year or two, did you sell this also? Yesterday we saw reports that over 173,000 arms, guns were missing in the police armory. My goodness. 173,000 guns. We can't even count the magazines. Do you understand this kind of?
Some would actually say, is naming them more of a priority than actually shutting down?
If we even want to name them, we should do it the right way. At any rate, it's not just about naming them. It's not enough to say you're a criminal and they let you continue to roam the street. It's about looking for this hard evidence so that you can nail these people and put them behind bars forever. It's not just about naming them. And it is because the whole system is messed up. It makes it look like we are talking about rocket science. It's not rocket science. One of those days, I was in a vehicle going to Benue, and I joined a private vehicle driven by a policeman, by another policeman, and they engaged in a long conversation. I wasn't part of it. I was just listening shortly after one of the elections. And one of them was talking about one of his boys that he had to lock in a guard room before traveling because the guy sold the service pistol. And just came back and said people attacked him and gave himself. He actually shot himself with one of the bullets and to show how he escaped.
Is that because of poverty or what?
Well, I don't know how to explain that. And he sold that pistol for 250,000 after his own boss. It takes a criminal to catch a criminal. Anyway, said after interrogating him, he said the wife was in the hospital. She needed to give birth. She needed to go through operation. He has asked everybody. Nobody was willing to borrow him money. And so there was somebody that has told him, help me get a gun, that the person is not a criminal. He's trying to protect himself. He lives in an area that is terrorized by criminals. So the only way to get a gun was to get a service pistol. And I said, but these things are registered. They went to take a file, and one of the numbers of the gun, they cleaned one of the numbers so that it doesn't correspond with what you have. I was hearing that live. If that guy, junior officer at that level could do that, you can imagine what even the senior officers do. So how do we even tell? Because the testimonies we often see are sort of teleguided. So how every time they come out and parade criminals and parade 3 guns, how are we able to tell that it was actually just 3 guns they got? Who is able to determine that they didn't get 6 and displayed 3 and sold 3 back to the same system using the back channel? So there's so much questions that need to be asked. These days you go into a crime scene, they litter it up because they don't even want to create the room for you to pick sensitive things that you can then analyze, you know, to find out what really happened. So there's so much question to be asked. Getting these sponsors is not exactly anything difficult if our security wants to work, and if they think they don't have the tool, merely partnering with Interpol or partnering with other agencies in the world can help us do some of these things.
And how important is this naming itself, you know, to the fight against the terrorism and insurgency?
Well, to know the sponsor of a thing is to cut life, it's to cut blood supply. I will give you a simple example. During the Civil War, when we had a finance minister, Awolowo was the finance minister of Nigeria, we needed to develop a fiscal strategy to also win the war, because the wars are not just about guns and the soldiers. You know, there are so much strategy around it. And he basically advised the government to say, hey, you cannot be fighting a people and be feeding them, even though that is a deadly strategy today in the world. But basically cutting away food, water supply, and drugs cost more damage to the East than merely shooting people down. Because for you to, as simple as a gun looks, for you to be able to lift it, you must have had some food, right?
Really ask quite a lot.
You know, so that in itself was a strategy. So that was why I was asking questions about how do these people feed? How do they survive? How do they get the fuel that moves those hundreds of bikes with which they carry out those hundreds of kidnaps and coordinate those fantastic attacks into the bush?
Fantastic indeed.
You
Do
know,
they have filling stations?
Do you get that?
How do they move?
Look at the guys
fuel?
who had come out of the bush after several months or several years to say they are handing over. You don't see, or I mean, can you imagine you being outside in a developed place like Abuja, just staying outside unprotected with some part of your skin open by 7 p.m. You'll be beaten to hell with mosquitoes. And these guys live in the bush and they come out and they're okay. So how do they survive? These are basic questions that if we interrogate with all of the people who said they are handing over, we'll begin to put 2 and 2 together and begin to understand this entire network. So it's not just about guns and tanks and helicopters and everything. It's about the channels of supply. Can we cut them off? You know, these things succeeded in places like Somalia and the rest, where when they started running their disarmament program, you know, they were getting back AK-47 with just a loaf of bread. What's the use of an AK-47 to you if you are hungry and you know you will drop dead in the next minute?
Well, thank you so much for this perspectives on this story. It's very, very interesting there. Now, we will take a quick break, and then when we come back, we will be continuing our discussion on the program. Please stay with us.
The board and management of Media Trust Limited invites the general public to its annual Daily Trust Dialogue, themed 2023, The Politics, Economy and Insecurity. Date, 20th January 2022. Location, NAF Conference Center and Suites, Abuja. Time, 10 a.m. prompt. Chairman of the occasion, former Head of State, General Abdulsalami Abubakar, GCFR. Guest speaker, Governor of Kaduna State, Malan Nasir Ahmed El-Rufai. Guest speaker, Governor of Ebonyi State, Engineer David Umahi. Guest speaker, former Chairman, Federal Inland Revenue Service, Mrs. Ifueko Omoigui Okauru. Moderator, Executive Director, Daria Media Nigeria Limited, Kadaria Ahmed. The event will be transmitted live on Trust TV, and all participants must observe COVID-19 protocols and wear their face masks.
Get latest updates on current topical issues and breaking news by downloading the Trust TV mobile app on your Android devices. Go online, click Google Play Store, search Trust TV, install the app, and get doses of unfiltered information on happenings all over the world in your pocket. Trust TV, documenting the Nigerian story.
All right, welcome back. If you are just joining us, this is Daybreak on Trust Television, and right here we're taking a look at the stories that made headways on our dailies this morning, and we have Deputy Business Editor, Daily Trust, Sunday Michael, giving us perspectives on the stories that made headways on the papers this morning.
On the Nation newspaper, we have some very interesting stories there. One of them about Twitter ban. We are hearing that Twitter has met the conditions, required, by the federal government. So it appears that it will soon have a comeback, of Twitter for many social media users in Nigeria. Maybe we should be excited.
Well, maybe, yes, because for people who are ardent followers of Twitter, they found a way to continue to remain on the app. What is painful is that even the visibility that the government itself enjoyed from Twitter, it lost by taking that drastic action. It is still left to be seen whether or not this whole decision was a gain or a loss for Nigeria. Especially given that this government was a massive beneficiary of the social media in pushing out its messages and campaigns and all of that. And there's something critical to the whole community of Nigerians on Twitter. It's the age bracket that is critical. You cannot be talking to anybody 40 and below today using the traditional media. They are not there. They are not, so they're basically not listening to you. Twitter, among other social media outlets, provided that kind of... you would not like the way they talk. They are fierce. They are... I mean, the things they won't say to you physically, they can afford to tell you over the social media. But it's the reality of the people you have to lead. There's no running away from it. Other systems have even people who are even more fierce, who are even more educated. They found a way to live with it. So you cannot choose how your followers will react to you. If you don't want all those kind of confrontation, stay away.
Right.
And by so doing, you cannot say because they have chosen those kind of foul language, you would also resort to using those kind of languages. So, one, we are a sovereign country, but if you want a service and there is a service condition attached to you, you're also willing to either meet the service condition or not want it at all.
Right.
In our own case, I think we took an affront to Twitter, restricting the account of our own president, or deleting tweets that violated his own community service. So it's a balance between these are our rules, and these ones are saying this is our country. So if you have to operate here, you must keep to this one. This guy is saying if you have to use our app, then you must also. So I think it is finding that fine balance. It also, there is a conversation, is not just a Nigerian thing. It's something that is happening around the world over what amount of freedom or restriction should we have with this kind of, and what is a no-go area? I mean, with regards to how the service providers also treat a sovereign government. So I think it's a good opportunity to have had this conversation. I know one of the benefits was asking them to open an office in Nigeria. I hope that was also and then the whole thing about paying taxes is not just to Twitter. It's a conversation, in fact, that actually predates this government. I remember the former Minister of Finance, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, down to the early days of Kemi Adeosun, talking about how there are virtual services that are making billions in this country, but in a way are not paying back. So I think to that extent, it's a win-win for both parties. Yeah.
Okay. Now, before the Twitter ban, Twitter was quite an explosive platform for Nigerians. So if eventually we get to see a comeback, do you think people will still have that feel of what Twitter used to be like?
They will, because Twitter gives a different kind of messaging platform that none of the existing social media platform has been able to replicate. Short, feisty, actionable points. They just drop them within 144 words. And it is, I mean, for people who still follow using VPNs, there's a whole lot of conversations and trends happening over that. But because there had been a whole lot of talk around how even safe the VPNs are with regards to making your information available to anonymous VPN providers that you do not know who could hack into your system and all, it has sort of reduced people's predisposition to the whole idea of, the VPN thing is like hacking into an open Wi-Fi. You don't know who is looking, you don't know who is tapping your information and all. So if it becomes available again and it is enabled such that you don't even need all of these reconnections, to get it will surely pick up again, because the followership and the steam that that emanates from Twitter, it's about what we make of it. It's not just about the app, you know, as an entity. It's because it is convenient for most people to jump on it, drop a lot of information, and then get immediate engagement, because sometimes it is not even about the tweet, it's about the reaction to the tweets, you know, that are even far more interesting than the tweet. You recall, in fact, even in one of our stories we reviewed this morning, where the government of a state describing an opposition person as an idle blogger. But he's got so much following on Twitter, even more than the state government. His following on Twitter is bigger than the state government following on Twitter. You know, but they call him an idle blogger. Whether or not that is true is the difference. But he has a following that outweighs Kaduna. It's not just about the people in Kaduna. He's that big on the social media.
Okay. All right. Briefly, in 1 minute, I would like you to comment on the jailbreaks that we experienced last year. We are hearing that 3,000 escapees are still at large, and this is coming from the NCS itself. So, are we ever going to get those escapees back?
It's painful. It's irritating. It's shameful. You know, it ties back to the whole comments around naming and shaming. It is you and I, as enlightened as we are, and as exposed as we are, don't even know any of the 3,000 they are looking for. Their names are not on any newspaper, they are not on any media website. You cannot, so we probably all had gone past these so-called wanted people 100 times over. We don't even know who they are. What it simply speaks to is the fact that these people don't also have biodatas about these persons. So what they do in other places, if somebody is a sensitive, wanted person, if you go to the airport, you see their pictures everywhere. If you go to the rail stations, you see their pictures everywhere. If you go to public places like post office, they have their posters everywhere, billboards. So we have not even seen these people come up with this data. And you would have shared security information about them so that if they attempt to attempt anything that they use their thumbprint, it should trigger an alarm that this person is a wanted person. If you attempt to use a bank statement or do a transfer, because it is tied to a BVN that is tied to a person who is wanted, it should trigger. That is why we have all of this multi-layer information about duplicating our data everywhere, but when you really need them to track people, it doesn't exist.
Quite sad.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show this morning and sharing your perspectives with us. We've been speaking with the Deputy Business Editor, Daily Trust, Sunday Michael, giving us her perspectives on the stories that made the headlines this morning. Now, we will take a quick break, and then when we come back, we'll be having other discussions on the program. Thank you so much for coming.
My pleasure.
Get latest updates on current topical issues and breaking news by downloading the Trust TV mobile app on your Android devices. Go online, click Google Play Store, search Trust TV, install the app, and get doses of unfiltered information on happenings all over the world in your pocket. Trust TV, documenting the Nigerian story. Get late.
Well, thank you so much for staying with us. And if you're just joining, you're watching Daybreak, reaching you live from the nation's capital in Abuja. And now we will be taking other discussions on the program. And we have in the studio Maina Sarakogo Umar, who is a senior lawyer and also a public affairs commentator, to talk to us about this pending issue that we've been talking about, specifically the electoral bill. But before then, let's also get his own thoughts about the demise of the former presidential aspirant. We'll be taking your own perspective on that shortly after this report about the life and times of the former presidential candidate Bashir Tofa. Please stay with us.
When he has children, we can only imagine what they are going through. But it's something that we all know is going to happen. It's inevitable. So,
His death is not just a loss for the people of Kano State, but a loss for Nigeria as a whole, because late Tofa left his mark everywhere. We pray to Allah to forgive his shortcomings and grant him Jannatul Firdaus.
Presidential candidate of the National Republican Convention NRC and elder statesman Alhaji Bashir Othman Tofa is no more. Tofa was the main challenger of Chief MKO Abiola of the Social Democratic Party SDP in the annulled 1993 presidential election of the aborted Third Republic. Born on the 20th of June 1947 into a Kanuri family in Kano, Alhaji Bashir Othman Tofa started his educational career at Shahuchi Junior Primary School and City Senior Primary School in Kano from 1962 to 1966, according to Wikipedia. Late Bashir Tofa later attended Provincial College, Kano, and upon completion of his studies, worked briefly with Royal Exchange Insurance Company from 1967 to 1968, before he subsequently attended City of London College between 1970 and 1973. Tofa is a writer, poet, businessman, and a politician. His political career began in 1976 when he was elected councillor into Dawakin Tofa Local Government Council, and in 1977 became a member of the Constituent Assembly. Tofa rose politically to become the secretary of Kano branch of the MPN and subsequently its national financial secretary. He was also a member of the Green Revolution National Committee. The Kanuri Kano-born politician Bashir Tofa played a key role during the Third Republic as he joined the National Republican Convention NRC in 1990 and in 1993 emerged its presidential candidate ahead of other contestants, Pere Ajunwa, Joe Nwodu, and Alhatu Tafida through option A4, a system introduced by the then Babangida administration. Late Bashir Tofa was defeated in the annulled 1993 election by the SDP candidate Chief MKO Abiola by 2 million votes, including in his home state Kano, according to the result announced by the Humphrey Nwosu-led defunct National Electoral Commission (NEC), where Abiola was said to have polled 4.3 million votes as against Tofa's 2.3 million. Tofa was also, until his death, a businessman, oil mogul, and a board member of other ventures. He founded Kano Concerned Citizens KCC to champion returning Kano to the path of economic growth and prosperity. He died in the early hours of Monday, 3rd January 2022, after a brief illness. May Allah grant his soul eternal rest.
All right, well, there you have it, the life and times of the late presidential candidate Bashir Tofa, a strong politician, actually, and he's known to be a writer and a human rights activist that has represented a lot of, ideals, of the northern region, specifically, protecting the interests of human rights, in Nigeria, and his contribution to national growth and development can never be underestimated. Now, let's get, some, thoughts, about, Bashir Tofa from our guest. Welcome to the studio again.
Thank you very much. It's my honor to be here with you. Happy New Year.
Yes. So maybe if you could just give us some highlights of what you remember about the person of Bashir Tofa.
Yes, late Bashir Usman Tofa was a man of many parts. First of all, he happens to be one of the most diverse writer of diverse fields. He was more known of writing, documenting the culture, the tradition, the history of the northern people. Not just Kano alone, but the entirety of the north, molding children. In fact, at a time, most of the schools, primary and secondary schools in northern Nigeria, were using the literature assembly of Bashir Tofa. When Bashir Tofa got involved in politics, so many people were surprised. It was at the age of 43 of his lifetime. And he was already seen as one of the most glittering star patriots from the northern part of the country. In the religion of Islam, it says that when you say people should give you power, it shouldn't be given to you. He was invited to contest for the presidency by the powers that be there. Not that he was interested in it. He was invited, he was drafted into it. And then Bashir Tofa, because of the characters he is made of, because of the principles everybody knew him to stand. Because at the age of 43, then he was already a statesman of highest pedigree, being respected by all and sundry in northern Nigeria. He went. Bashir Tofa was among the first 3 people that congratulated Abiola. Yes.
Despite
yes, which is a rare display of statesmanship that you don't get in modern day politicians.
Right.
He congratulated Abiola. Abiola defeated Bashir Tofa in Kano. Abiola was having his running mate, both Abiola and the running mate, Muslim ticket. You understand? Dr. Sylvester Ugo, the vice presidential, the running mate of Bashir Tofa, Abiola was able to defeat him in his Igbo land.
Wow.
Interesting.
So it was a landmark something. So if there is anybody that deserved to be given national honor after the death of Abiola, it would have been Bashir Tofa. Not the running mate of Abiola, Baba Gana Kingibe. Because whether the running mate likes it or not, the victory goes with the arrowhead, the presidential candidate of the party, the SDP. So Bashir Tofa really demonstrated statesmanship. And since then, he decided to go down and be serving as guardian of culture, morality, and national cohesion.
In fact, if you look at some of the books that he wrote, it's a representation of his caliber of person. About 8 books he wrote, and then we have some of them, Tunaninka Kamaninka in Hausa, which means the way you think reflects in your character.
Another thing about Bashir Tofa that makes him unprecedentedly different is that for the past 50 years of Bashir Tofa's life, in the vicinity of his house, you will see tailors there. These tailors, day and night, are busy sewing clothes. He is not selling the clothes. The textile materials are brought. These clothes are distributed across the length and breadth of Nigeria for orphans, for destitutes, for poor people. Giving them clothes. And then greater portion of his money normally goes into charity, encouraging young orphans or these destitute on the streets to go into Western education.
Quite very interesting.
Last week, Last week, Bashir Topa was on the news warning about drug problem among the youth. Not only in Kano, but in the north. It was during such a statement, he really pronounced that he was at the age.
Presidential candidate of the National
of his life.
Many would actually say it seems from that statement like he felt he was going to pass on.
Yes. 48 hours thereafter, he found himself sick, eventually got himself into coma. What do you call this? Oxygen support kinds of something, ICU. And eventually he passed away. So the exemplary qualities of the man is irreplaceable.
So let's talk about the lessons for our present-day politicians. I mean, a lot of people have said, look, part of the problems that Nigeria has today is because of politicians, the way they run politics, the way they, behave towards politics. So much, they preach so much division, and all of that. What are the lessons, for our politicians taken from the life of
the missing link is that they do not even know the definition of leadership. There's a difference between politics and leadership. Politics is the instrumentality through which you come into the power of responsibility. Leadership is a trust for you to promote, to protect, and to project the interests and aspirations of your followers. So, greater number of modern day politicians are not leaders, but politicians. A politician's interest is, how do I win election? Whether it's by telling lies, whether it's by use of money, whether it's by use of brigandage. But a leader is seeing his responsibility as a beacon of trust. He's seeing himself as vicegerent, as representative of God to transcend natural justice, to harmonize the resources, and then balance justice among the citizenry. That is a leader. And that is what we have gotten in Bashir Topa, and that is what we are lacking in modern day politicians.
So what really changed over time? Is it the
system? Values. The political values of today is accumulation of money. They are seeing politics as investments. Bashir Topa and other people are seeing politics as instrumentality of trust. Hold on this responsibility as vicegerent, as representative of God, believing that you will be accountable for every second you happen to be on power. So the value system, are you going there to serve, or you are going there to recoup dividends of investments? And then to add it towards the side of these people that are looking at it from the kleptonic side of recouping investments, we now said, okay, we are applying the capitalist model. Buy a form if you want to contest, worth millions. Use all the money you can to contest. You will see a politician telling him, say, utilize whatever instruments you have so that at the end my name will be emerged as the winner. Let my opponent go to the court, bearing in mind that if he has the money, he has the ultimate, because he can hire the most sophisticated lawyers who will go and argue on the basis of technicalities. They throw away the arguments. But somebody that believes that is a trust, somebody that believes that he's holding it as a representative of God, as an ambassador of God, will always be watchful of every second of himself in office, trying to adjudge himself, whether or not he will be able to pass the template.
So with all of these challenges that we're having, are we hopeful that it's going to change anytime soon?
I don't see that in the immediate future. Because every day we are moving in reverse order. The most primary responsibility of every government, as per the 1999 Constitution, Section 14, subsection 2, is security of lives and property. There is nowhere that is safe in the country today. Nowhere. So if they cannot even do the primary one, and then with the quantum of money that has been sunk into political machinery from 1999 to date. Visibly, there is no infrastructure.
Okay, now let's talk about the role of elder statesmen.
Yes.
You know, sometimes you find, you know, the comments and the body language of some of these elder statements as embarrassing, in the sense that they say things that tend to divide the nation further instead of uniting the nation. So in terms of modeling younger politicians, you know, and all of that, are there lessons, you know, for elder statesmen, other elder statesmen, you know, in the country, in the, you know, from the life of Bashir Tofa?
There are lessons. Number one, a statesman is a custodian of trust for peace, harmony, unity, and tranquility of the society. When the tussle over the emirship of Kano was at its head, Bashir Tofa was the arrowhead needle that mended all the fences behind the scene. He's somebody that believes that he has the responsibility of stabilizing the polity. Your number one responsibility as a statesman is that you should use the power of your age, the power of your intellect, the power of the respect people gives you, the power of the linkages, blocks, the various blocks, in order to promote peace. Islam is peace. So in order to promote it, but greater number of the patriots we are having now ascribed as nationalists are either looking at things from the angle of which of the political divides will it favor. Which side will I take so as to make His Excellency smile? How many of our statesmen are like Bashir Tofa, who whatever he can say behind the scene, he can say it in the public? Greater number are having one tribe in the daytime and one tribe in the night.
Well,
a statesman should be above board. Should be the spring upon which the stability or instability of any polity should rest.
Right. Well, may his soul rest in peace.
Amen. Amen.
With the Lord. Now, earlier we were actually discussing with you, and you wanted to comment, you know, on the legal hurdle clouding the Olubadan succession and all of that.
Yes, I wanted to sound a point of caution. You see, Ibadan land is a very important traditional center in the whole of West Africa. Everybody acknowledges that. And Ibadan land is having one of the most finest succession chart or succession system in Nigeria. Next to Benin Kingdom, there is no traditional system that is better than Ibadan land, because their system is already determined in such a way that you will be able to predict who will be the next Olubadan. In such a way that you will be able to predict who the next Oba of Benin will be. These two political systems, traditional systems, are so excellent that I would say all other traditional institutions should emulate them. The succession of the destiny is that you have 21 bales. In other words, those title holders that can succeed. The number 21 is the Olubadan. The number 20 will be the automatic successor. The number 19 is by left side of it. Under this one, there is number 17, number 16, number 15, like that up to number 1. In the course of it, during the pendency of the Olubadan, if one dies, another one that is under him will be elevated to that distance.
okay.
So
They
why
have
the
this
drama?
fine system. But by the time you allow the traditionality to be diluted with politics or legality, then you are not doing the good service to the tradition.
All right.
That is my summary on that.
Okay, all right. We have standing by to join us virtually the National Chairman, Action Democratic Party, Engineer Sani Abagi, who will also be talking to us about the life and times of the late Bashir Tofa, who was a member of the National Republican Convention, NRC, at the time. He joins us now to give perspectives and his thoughts about his memories about the late Bashir Tofa. Hello, good morning and welcome to Daybreak.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Oh, great. Thank you for joining. All right. So let's get your own memories that you remember about Bashir Tofa being a party chieftain as yourself, at the time in 1993.
Well, Bashir Tofa, generally, may he grant the...
I'm not sure we can hear you.
Friends and everything that still to be at proud. Bashir Tofa was personality. Believe you me, runs what Nigeria is, especially now. So it's sad that he had to leave us at this point in time when people like himself are required to move this country forward. I remember when he joined the presidential race, I was the coordinator for North Central for Bashir Tofa. And what came to how do we put Nigeria a strong nation, the community of Africa? How do we move this forward politically, economically? You can see selected as his running mate. You remember the gentleman was the central bank governor of the Biafra, but Robert said this is the way by which we cement whatever differences concern the nation by bringing him on board, so that the people of the Southeast will not feel that they are still being marginalized or being persecuted for what happened, during the campaign for the second of that point. So you can see the kind of and the direction that he wants to take the country. That's why I said such personalities that need now unite the country, give this country the kind of great leap forward that we need politically, socially, and economically. So we missed him a lot. But personally, he was in my house just about 2-3 weeks ago. And the only we were discussing was, do we make this country better and safer? It was so what that was the last time we were going to do it. And believe me, he went back to Kano, he still said that we must do that, and this country must. So Bashir Tofa to us, really, it's a big loss, and I'm sure not only to us Nigerians, especially those who were lucky to have very close contact with him. So I really lost a friend, really, and I'm sure most Nigerians also share in this sorrow. But the good thing is that he left a lot of legacy behind. Believe me, he put together groups that those in Kano, his states where he came from, and in Nigeria he was working on it will move forward, that will bring people of like minds like himself together across the board, not only from the north. He wasn't talking about the north in particular. He was talking about Nigeria, and that group, which he he brought together is to help cement all these differences that we have, all these gaps that we have in our political activities. So I think we lost Bashir Tofa at a time that, well, God knows the best, of course, but this is the time we need him most.
Right. Aside from being a politician, he's also a writer. 8 books to his credit. And can you talk to us about the impact of his literary works, in the lives of Nigerians?
Well, I believe he was so much passionate about the youth, the place of the youth in the scheme of things, and the women in particular. So I think his writers were what will rekindle that nationalistic thinking in the youth and women and Nigeria as a whole. So, like in practice, writings, contacts and personal and group, contacts is all about what can make this country stronger, and then more united, and so that the youth in particular will have a place, of pride in the way things are done. Like what is happening in other so-called developed societies. The youth are not left behind. In fact, you find the youth even leading the entire country. So Bashir Tofa believes, very strongly in that. And like you said, in his, literally, exercise, he personifies those things. And whether Obama or Sama or Nupima or Kanuri or whatever, it doesn't matter. What matters have something that you can really, to the table. So even in his interventions, you can see the youth are always center of what he wants to do. So, like I said, him, must now, but God is the best.
Well, also, can you talk to us about some of the selfless acts that you can remember, about Bashir Tofa in your engagement with him? We understand that there's this, tailors that are sewing things, for children, across the country that he shares, for them. And what are other selfless acts that you can remember, as far as the life of Bashir Tofa?
Well, you see, Bashir Tofa transcends Nigerian borders in terms of his philanthropist, engagement. And I can tell you that, particularly in Kano, I don't know details of what I was doing actually, but he always shares with me that, okay, Yabaji Jakada, like he always called me, please, have something in Niger State, get the youth together, organize them. If it's money, some of us, we can give them the little money they require to start a business or to become somebody that will be independent economically, on their own. So I cannot give you the specifics, but for instance, like on the Facebook, I saw a bit efficient money that he built in, I think, in. So when it's come to charity, he has no limit really as far as then his own entity really. So I cannot give you the specifics, but I can tell you that from my interactions with him, but it's for the people. It's somebody that I'm sure his house. You go to Kano, his house is always. There's a crowd, that is looking for, and it's always there.
Before we go, I want you to talk about, how relevant the role of elder statesmen is in our society and in our politics of today, taking cue from, the likes of Bashir Tofa.
Well, you see, they said the words of the elders is the words of wisdom. And an old man sitting down can see, a young man climbing on the tree cannot see. So, which means, we cannot make any meaningful progress if we do not factor in, the role of the elders. Yes, we may be battling with some necessary problems in terms of unity of the country, in terms of how the elders themselves have allowed space in the politics, especially in the country that ever makes it without factor in the role of the elders. And we have them abound in Nigeria, and I'm sure they themselves cannot afford to allow the country to go on in the end of retardation. So many, but they would definitely have to be given in terms of cases, even taking a stand, that may not be popular with some of the majority of the people, but as an elder who has seen it before, who knows, to a very large what is good for the, there comes a time when they take a stand and say, this is where we want to. We have seen it happen, last administration, I mean the PDP administration, came together, wrongly or rightly, they took a stand.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on the show this morning and sharing with us your memories of the late Bashir Tofa, former presidential candidate at the time in 1993. Thank you for joining. All right, well, there we have it. We've been speaking with the national chairman, Action Democratic Party, Engineer Sani Abagi, who was a member of the National Republican Convention at the time, being a chieftain alongside late Bashir Tofa there. Now, for more details, Daily Trust leads with the life and times of Bashir Tofa. On the front page, you'd find details, more in-depth story about, the passing of Bashir Tofa on page 5 of the paper. You can pick a copy to have more details. His life as a writer, a politician, and activist there. All right, now let's talk about some more issues about political reforms and legacies. One of the pending issues that we carried over into the year 2022 is the issue of the Electoral Amendment Bill, which assent was withheld by the president. A lot of issues, are following that. Now, the year 2021, without a doubt, has been eventful in Nigeria and indeed globally. Most of the events that ended 2022, like the COVID-19 pandemic and the NSAS protest, the lockdown that grounded the socio-economic and political activities, the insecurity to a large extent, kidnapping of school children, ushered in the 2021 and unfortunately remain topical issues in Nigeria and the rest of the world. Now, maybe we should get some comments about this recent errors, drafting errors, in the electoral bill and how that could impact in the president giving his assent to the bill.
Well, in all honesty, I do not see any drafting error in the bill. You can take a horse to the river, but you can't force it to drink. The Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, Section 58 clearly says that a bill, if prepared by the National Assembly under the powers of Sections 4 and 11, will be presented to the President within 30 days to get his assent. Then Section 58, subsection 5 says that after 30 days, the bill is either returned to the National Assembly, signed, or not signed with explanations or requests for amendments, or retaining it there with the president without communicating anything. That is presumed to have been not assented to by the president. Then section 59, subsection 5 says that where such happens, the National Assembly, if they so wish, they can veto the president by having 2/3 members at a joint sitting of the National Assembly, not collecting signatures on the street. And that makes the bill law, and it must be respected and implemented by the president.
Yes, so,
and all the decisions.
Yes, so the errors here being referred to were not the ones raised by the president, but rather by civil society organizations, you know, that did an understudy of the bill and came up with certain concerns and certain issues that were raised. For instance, they said subsection 1 of the section that's talking about section 24, subsection 1 was omitted, resulting to improper cross-referencing. Other issues are that section 63 was wrongly referenced in the subsection. There is no relationship between section 50 and section 63 of the bill. The reference to subsection 3 of section 64 is incorrect, and that the subsection 3 does not relate to disputed results. It relates to statement of rejected ballots and so on. So many other such you know, issues of errors here and there. So what does this say about the diligence, the due diligence that, you know, that we undertake
that
before
is a mirror.
Laws, you know, are
That
transmitted?
is a mirror regarding the quality of lawmakers we are having. The legal drafters and the lawmakers, the office of the Attorney General itself, and the office of the Clerk of the Parliament. That tells you the quality, the extent of the diligence, the in court patriotism to the nation that they are having. That tells you that we are having serious problems. If at that level, something will get to the president with all these infractions at this level, and nobody is penalized, then we are in for doom.
So what really is stopping the president from giving assent?
Well, the reasons, I'm not even aware of these inconsistencies until now raised by my brother. The reason given by the president, essentially 2 major reasons. One, if direct primaries is allowed, there will be congestion there which can cause insecurity. And then the need for the political parties to have the independence to determine whether they want to go by direct primaries, or they want to go by consensus, or they want to go by delegate system. So that the need for the independence to be given to the political parties. But all those things, as far as I'm concerned, are diversionaries. Because number one, the determination of, and then the talking of the expensiveness. Yet, the National Assembly is not seeing anything expensive in inflating the budget of the year, by over the amount being projected for the election. Yet, we are still talking about insecurity. The same politicians are attending political jamborees, celebrations, cultural festivities, and the rest. And you see them without any due respect to the protocols of COVID-19.
Okay, now if you look at the timeline of political activities,
yes,
you know, of the year 2022, do you think that those could be hindrances, or maybe some
number one is the government telling us that up to that time there will not be security restored in the country? That is the first question. The primary responsibility of government is security and welfare of the citizen. So if you are saying that you are fearing insecurity, does that mean up to that time you don't have solution to insecurity? That is one. And then secondly, if you are talking about, say, electronic or not electronic, direct or indirect, Section 153 under the INEC, the schedules there to the Constitution clearly gives the INEC the power to determine which system of election they should conduct for the country. And repeatedly, INEC said that they are ready for electronic election. Repeatedly. So you can't come and be insisting that it must be this, it must be this. The main reasons, by my own thinking, has to do with putting political convenience over and above the patriotism of having electoral act. For example, if this electoral act is signed into law, the first litmus test will be on the APC.
But then, well, we'll talk about
because of the February Convention.
Yes. Well, we'll talk about the cogency of
Yes.
the reasons given by the president. You know, looking at one of them that the president raised about the rights of political parties to get to decide the mode, you know. Of,
what you should have done would have
electing
been to return it before the expiration of the 30 days with side comments and remarks. Amend this to suit this, delete this to suit this. That is what you should have done, not
to
keep
wait
it until
the
after
expiry.
31 days and then returning it without the corresponding remarks. Remember, this is not the first time this thing is being taken to the president. We saw it in 2018 or 2019.
There's a fourth, actually.
Exactly.
All right, let's take a quick break now. And then when we come back, we'll talk some more about the Electoral Amendment Bill. Stay with us.
People's Democratic Party PDP Deputy Chairman in Zamfara State, Professor Kabiru Jabaka, claimed that the present administration in the state have not initiated and completed a single capital project, and its support for victims of banditry in the state is not good enough. The PDP is asking the Bello Muhammad administration to wake up to what it described as a slumber to live up to its constitutional responsibility of ensuring the welfare and security of the citizens. The PDP alleged that in the last 3 days, more than 50 persons were killed, while several others abducted in the state. But instead of State Governor Bello Muhammad to stay behind to provide succor to the victims, he left the country to Niger Republic to watch wrestling.
The welfare of the people and security of their lives is the primary purpose of government, as enshrined in our Constitution and other international charters signed by our country. But unfortunately, if we look at the attitude of the leadership in the state, their acts demonstrate that they have chosen comfort as their primary objective of leadership in the converse. Why? Because everybody, I'm sure, will agree with me that it is dishonorable of our leadership in the state at this very critical time, at this very challenging time, when the state is profusely bleeding, lives are lost every day, more than 50 people killed in 3 days, houses torched, and several people abducted, that the head of governance in the state can leave the state as well as the country only to go and enjoy a pastime watching wrestling in Niger.
Professor Jabaka decried that the state's economy and schools have been shut down in the state for some time, but the state government is not making any efforts to improve the situation. It wants the state government to work hard to ensure peace returns to the state so that the economy can pick up.
How do you imagine a leader having, comfort when his state is bleeding like this, when the economy of his people is completely ruined, when education of the people of the state can be said to be educationally shut down? Our children are shut down from school, we can say indefinitely. This is very unfortunate. So I think these are enough for the people of Zamfara State to be conscious of what is happening so that they decide for themselves.
The Zamfara State PDP Deputy Chairman, Professor Kabiru Jabaka, highlighted the areas the present administration has not done well, to include lack of establishing official IDP camps, inadequate support to victims of banditry, and completion of a single capital project in the state, among others.
All right, welcome back, and we are still talking the electoral bill, and you were actually giving us some perspectives before we actually went on that quick break.
Yes. So, like we said, 4 times this thing, and then you are having the liaison officer of the president to the National Assembly. You are having series of meetings between the leadership of the National Assembly and the president. You are having series of meetings, tripartite meeting, leadership of the National Assembly, the president, and the ruling party. All these things can be harmoniously tailored.
And all of them have aides.
Within a period of 30 minutes, you can tailor all these things. Because the pulse of the nation currently is the demand for this electoral act. There is nothing that has united and tickled the interest of the preponderance of the masses like this electoral act. The public hearing has generated so much enthusiasm among the citizenry, among the electors, the civil society groups. Everybody is interested in it. Now, if democracy, as per Section 14 subsection 1, which says that sovereignty belongs to the people, the democracy's definition is that it is the government for the people. The people have spoken unambiguously, loud enough for you to go into it. Any other thing there that you believe will be an albatross to your own political interest, remove it. Since you have the knife and the flesh, remove it. But at least respect the wishes and aspirations of the people for this electoral amendment. Let it for this time around be signed, because the further you delay it, the more you will bring the same justification you brought in 2019. That
So
it was too close to election date. We cannot implement it.
So today is the 4th of January already.
Yes.
And do we really hope to see the president give an assent or to see a veto?
No, we have already passed that level. The National Assembly will reconvene on the 18th of January. Now, on the 18th of January, when they reconvene, they promised that the matter will be tabled again before the House. If they now decide to table it in individual houses, it is still not in consonance with the constitutional requirement of Section 59, subsections 4 and 5, because it says joint seat. But if the Senate President, as the chairman of the National Assembly, joint sitting, convocate the sitting in one room, then we will now believe that yes, they have respect for the sanctity of the constitutional stipulations, because the power of the president to say I assent or I reject has even passed. So now there are 2 options or 3 options. The first option is when there is return, they convene this in a joint sitting, they take decision. If they have 2/3, it becomes law. If they cannot get 2/3, they have failed, the president has won. The second option is they leave it like that. After the 2023 elections, the 10th Assembly then will now go to the drawing board to really prepare a new electoral act based on the interests and aspirations of whosoever will be the next president. You understand? Then we now see to it where the pendulum will swing. And then the third one is that they sacrifice the popularity of the interests of the citizenry and then respect the bond of their mutual marriage, because we are seeing this unprecedented synergy between the legislature and the executive. So based on which probably they don't want to go contrary to the directional compass of the executive. And as such, for that reason, they will better let it die.
Well, we really
so
hope
it's either
to
of these
see.
scenarios we will see after the 18th
We
of
really
January
hope
when
to
they
see
reconvene.
something positive come out of this.
Yes.
All right, then. So just before we go, we have to take the sports roundup, and Adeni Ajishafe put that together for us. Take a look.
Hello and welcome to Sport News. Senegal have accused Watford of refusing to release Ismail Assar for African Cup of Nations and will be seeking FIFA's intervention. The federation says Watford had told them on Friday they would not be releasing the highly rated forward for the tournament in Cameroon. Premier League club responded saying Ismail Assar is not fully fit since suffering a knee ligament injury during a 4-1 win over Manchester United on November 20 and have informed Senegal of the winger's time frame of recovery. Senegal Football Federation FSF General Secretary Victor Cissé says African football deserves same respect accorded to other continents, confederations and players. The Senegal Football Federation will take all necessary action to ensure that the basic rights of its footballers to play for their country is respected. Watford refused striker Emmanuel Dennis to join up with Nigeria, citing lateness from the Nigerian Football Federation. Nigeria did not contest the claim and have since replaced Dennis in their squad. Watford will lose 3 other players with the tournament: William Troost-Ekong of Nigeria and Moroccan pair of Imran Louza and Adam Massina. Meanwhile, former Cote d'Ivoire striker Didier Drogba has spoken about the disrespect going on concerning the African Cup of Nations 2021 and called for mutual respect. Several European clubs are still holding their African players, with some threatening players should they force their way to join their national teams. Drogba says respect must be mutual. AFCON is as important for Africans like the Euros or Copa America is for the Europeans and the Americans. There is still too much discrimination, inequalities with regards to our competitions. Our players going to represent their country is often synonymous with sanctions upon return from such competitions. After losing last game of 2021, Phoenix Suns returned to winning ways with a 133-99 victory over Charlotte Hornets in first game of 2022 at the Spectrum Center. Phoenix Suns' Devin Amani-Booker got a game high of 24 points, 7 rebounds to end the game as the top performer. Jalen Rashid-Smith his 19 points and 12 rebounds ahead of Charlotte Hornets' LaMelo Ball, who has 17 points, 3 rebounds. Phoenix Suns occupied the second position in the Western Conference table behind Golden State Warriors, while Charlotte Hornets are 7th in the Eastern Conference behind Chicago Bulls, Brooklyn Nets, Milwaukee Bucks, Miami Heat, Cleveland Cavaliers, and Philadelphia 76ers. Sacramento Kings defeated Miami Heat by 2 points, 115-113 at the Golden One Center. Kings Buddy Hield finished as top performer with 26 points, 6 rebounds, and 3 assists ahead of teammate De'Aaron Matisse Fox, who scored 24 points, 6 rebounds, and 6 assists for the Kings. Sacramento Kings are 10th in Western Conference, while Miami Heat sit at 4th position in the Eastern Conference. That's Sport News. I am Adeni Ajishafe.
Well, there you have it. Sports Roundup, as always. Adeni Ajishafe coming through for us here on Daybreak. Now, we've been speaking quite a lot. We looked at the life and times of the late Bashir Tofa, who is the former presidential candidate in the 1993 annulled presidential election. And we also discussed a little about the Electoral Amendment Bill. We have been speaking with Maina Sarah Kogo Umar here in the studio, and then joining us virtually also we had Sani Yabagi, who is the national chairman, the Action Democratic Party. Thank you so much for staying through till the end of the show. For those who joined late, you can catch up via our social media handles and also subscribe to our YouTube channel to get all the details and updates as always. Thank you so much for coming.
It's my honor
on
to
the program.
be here. Thank you very much.
Yes. With that, we wrap up the show. My name is Ayuba Ilia. We look forward to having you join us again tomorrow.